Dave, I'm telling you, I have taken my porch decorating skills to the next level, and I am so excited about it. I had to take down the Christmas lights, and usually on my front porch, we've got a pretty nice sized front porch, and I have some lights up there, some nice golden lights. Because we do spend a lot of time, especially when the weather's nice, we spend a lot of time either out on the front porch or on the back deck. And I've got some nice lights, to make it nice at nighttime. But those have to be taken down so I can put up the Christmas lights. And then I was taking down the Christmas lights and getting ready to put up the porch lights again. And I'm like, what? This is so tedious and time consuming. And there's got to be another way. And I've been looking.
You became the infomercial. There's got to be another way.
And I've actually, this is the sort of thing that with LED technology, I know that it had to be out there. But year after year, like every 6 to 8 months, I'd look for this and never find it. And it seems like it's such a no-brainer. And that is obviously string lights that are LED controlled that you can change the lights. Dave, I found them. 100 feet of changeable LED lights, $35. So Cheapy McGee was like, even if they don't work, it's $35. It's fine. I've got lights, and I can program them. I can make them blink. I can make them strobe. I can make them chase. So when the Eagles were playing, unfortunately, that didn't turn out so well. But when the Eagles were playing in the playoffs, they were red and green. When one of my sons got some great news from Temple University, they were maroon and cream. When the Phillies play, it's going to be red and white. And it can be green. I can do all these color combinations. Pretty granular. Like I can go 5 or 6 colors and repeat them. I've got red, blue, and green or red, green, and white for Christmas. I have some pastel. It's RGB. So, millions of colors, not realistically, but I get a pretty good color range out of these things, and I'm changing them every night based on my mood. It's the most wonderful thing you've ever seen.
I gotta tell everybody, the only thing lighting up more than these LEDs is Brad's face as he's describing this. You are like a proud grandfather holding up a baby. So have the neighbors commented at all? Has anybody made notice of Brad's new lights?
I think they're intimidated. And you can imagine.
I did not anticipate that.
You can imagine how intimidating it would be to talk to somebody that's pulled off something I pulled off. But
sure. Someone had to get out the 2-step ladder to put those lights up. That's a tremendous feat. David, I measured to make sure that these were perfectly spaced out across the front and on the sides. And like when Valentine's Day comes up, pink and white. When St. Patrick's Day, green. I don't have to ever change any lights for Christmas. They're there, and then I just hit a button, and boom, it's Christmas. By contrast, your neighbor Roger has taken up drinking because he's just like, what am I doing with my life? Brad Geiger seems to have it all figured out. Where are my porch lights? When does Roger get this cool lighting?
Listen, Roger's got porch lights. They're one fucking color like a peasant. They're one color, but he's doing the best he can.
Oh my God, I'm just going to say with a shout out to Roger to get your shit together, I'm going to say hello everybody and welcome to ComicLab, the show about lighting your porch beautifully and making comics.
And making a living from comics. I was trying to thread that needle. I couldn't. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his poorly lit friend, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And a reminder to everybody that we have a big goal for 2024, which is we're going to get to 500 Patreon backers. And when we do, you're going to get 2 episodes of Drunk and Drunker Comic Lab. Yes. Arguably 2 of the funniest episodes we have ever recorded. Join us right now over at patreon.com/comiclab. I guarantee you will not regret it.
Yeah, as of the recording right now, we're up 14 new members for the month. We're at 463. We are steadily climbing towards that 500. So we're getting there. We're really
I appreciate
getting
that you're doing this like a Jerry Lewis telethon. You're like, we're at 463. We're moving up the charts, gang.
And roll that timpani. What the world needs now. Listen, I've even got more good news for you, Dave Kellett. This show is being sponsored by one of our good friends out there. ComicLab is brought to you this week by the book, How Comics Were Made, A Visual History from the Drawing Board to the Printed Page. Comics historian and ComicLab fan Glenn Fleishman has spent years researching the history of newspaper comic strip production and reproduction and is bringing his expertise to this printed work full of comics from Yellow Kid through Krazy Kat, Doonesbury, Peanuts, and yes, Dave's own Drive. It will feature never-before-seen original drawings and printing artifacts such as flongs, the hilarious old-fashioned name for printing molds. The book draws from museum collections like the Billy Ireland Museum and the Charles M Schulz Library, generous access to artists' own archives, and Glenn's personal collection. Glenn's taking the book to crowdfunding in February using lessons drawn from this very podcast. You can read more about the book or sign up to get an alert when the campaign launches by going to howcomicsweremade.ink. Yes, that's ink, I-N-K, as in howcomicsweremade.ink.
And I will just take a second to sing Glenn's praise. I have known him for the better part of 8 or 10 years. He's an incredible polymath. When he goes deep on a subject, he researches like no other journalist I've met. He is an amazing writer and an amazing person and a great lover of comics. I cannot endorse this enough. howcomicsweremade.ink, I-N-K. You want to get over there and you want to back this project.
Absolutely. So, Dave, let's go right into our first topic of the day, and it comes in from a Patreon $5 backer who asks about which is the better business strategy. Listen to this, Dave. Do you think one large, highly successful title is more successful business than several mediocre titles? For example, Dave and Brad, you both work on one big title that's been working well for you all these years. Do you think you would be as successful as you are now if you had completed several smaller titles over your career? I ask because I feel like I am in the second camp, and I'm wondering if I'm doing it wrong. I want to tell a lot of stories in different settings, worlds, and genres. For context, I'm working in traditional publishing, but even my self-published stuff, I want to do many completed stories. A friend of mine works a bit slower than me, but her titles are way more successful, sold for a bigger advance, trendy art style, whereas I seem to make many mediocre B-rated action flick-like comic stories. Should I slow down and focus on making one really good story?
So I want to focus on the top part of this question first, which is, do you think you'd rather have one largely huge successful title or a couple of smaller, mediocre successful titles that together bring you a great career? And a little bit, that's like saying, Brad, is it better to inherit money from one rich parent or inherit money from a bunch of various rich uncles and aunts? You know what I mean? Like a little bit, you don't get to choose the path of success in your life in some respects. You can obviously aim the wagon down the path you'd like to go down, but God, we would all be so lucky to have a massive success or a bunch of middling successes. You know, it is not a guaranteed path in comics. It's not a guaranteed path in life. Life doesn't owe us a career and owe us success. You know, we will be lucky to get a living out of this, I guess is another way to say this, you know. And 20-year-old Dave was very aspirational. I wanted what Jim Davis had. I wanted what Schulz had. I wanted what Watterson had. I wanted what Burke Breathed had, right? 50-year-old Dave is now much more like, I want to to have a stable career for many more decades. I don't care about awards. I want to produce what I want to produce, and I want to have a stable career. And honestly, I think that is the most realistic, still high watermark goal that most of us should shoot for, is however you can construct it, a stable career over many decades, producing work that you love and believe in.
Yeah. Well, here's my question. I've got there's so many layers to this. First of all, first question back to the question asker is, what makes you think you have a choice? Right? Do you really think that somebody just sits down and says, I'm going to write a bestseller today? And all it's going to mean is I'm just going to slow down. And then that's how you write a bestseller. My problem is I'm going too fast, and I'm going to, it's like there was a great scene in the Larry Sanders Show. Remember Gary Shandling in the 1990s had a show that went behind the scenes at a TV talk show. And, at one point late in the series run, they had a new person come in that the network had sent down to shape up the show. And this guy comes up to Larry Sanders, the host, and says, listen, I was listening to the opening monologue, and you did 12 jokes, and only 6 of them got big laughs. And Larry Sanders goes, yeah, I know. That happens sometimes doing comedy. He says, we listen to that up in the studio, and we think we've got a good idea about how to address that. And Sanders goes, yeah? Well, what's that idea? He goes, you should only do the jokes that get big laughs.
Yeah, exactly.
This question is, you should only do the jokes that get big laughs. Well, how do you know what joke that is?
Brad, if I slowed down from Sheldon and didn't have the output that I did, if I slowed down, the obvious conclusion is that I would suddenly produce Mouse or Bone.
Right.
That's just what would happen if I slowed down.
Yes.
I mean, you get where we're going with this question asker in the sense that it is not an immediate result of aiming your wagon down that road that you're going to hit pay dirt, you know? Sometimes, and that's why I'm saying, aspirationally, it shouldn't be, well, I either get to choose a solid gold car or all the ponies I've ever wanted, right?
Yeah.
I aspirationally should be like, I would like to be able to do X in comics for X number of years at X level of income, making, I think that's more aspirationally realistic. It's really hard to make comics. First of all, you've already done that. Bully for you, success. It's really hard to do that decade after decade. Keep doing that. Like, I don't know that the goal should be, gosh, I wish I need to slow down because that'll get me a bestseller if I slowed down. You know, I for one thing, first of all, both Brad and I have not focused on one title. That might have just been
I'm glad we're getting
something that you missed. But like, I do Sheldon and Drive, and ostensibly the Anatomy series are completely different comics.
It's separate.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done thematic books. I've done Stripped as a project, which was the film. I've done How to Make Webcomics with Chris, Scott, and Brad. I've done the podcast, 2 different podcasts. So what I've tried to do over the course of my career is, much like Larry Sanders, you're never sure which one is going to hit. So, or which dish is going to be delicious. So you put a lot of pans on the fire and cooking them probably at the same time, so that at least one of them is bringing you income. One of them is working out of the 2 or 3 that you're working on at any given time. Because like Brad said, you can never guarantee which one's going to hit.
Yeah. And by the way, I want to extrapolate on that. He says, Brad and Dave, you both worked on one success. Well, I had Evil Ink After Dark, Greystone Inn, Fables, Courting Disaster, a series of single panel comics that I do on Patreon. And that's just the comics work, right? Now we go further, like you did, into 2 different books, 3 different books, webcomics.com. You see where this is going. Here's the but let's take Dave and I off the table. Let's take Jim Davis. Jim Davis only ever worked on one thing, right?
No.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Before he did Garfield, he was an assistant to the guy that did Tumbleweeds. That's how he got his start. Once he got Garfield started, he did another comic called U.S. Acres, which was a moderate success. It generated a TV animated series, which first back in the day of Saturday morning cartoons wasn't nothing, but it didn't have the success that Garfield had. But then again, what does? Jim Davis didn't do just one thing either. In fact, if you go beyond a surface level look at many of your people that you're going to say, well, they only did one thing, you're going to find out that they did their lives went a lot closer to what Dave is describing, where he's saying you put a lot of things, a lot of different pots and pans on the oven, and you see what bubbles first or best. Then you're going to see that a lot of people did that. And they did a lot of what you are calling mediocre B-rate stuff until one of them wasn't. Until one of the things that started out as maybe as mediocre B-rate stuff turned into something that was bigger than that. And then they followed that and they extrapolated and they built on that. And then it became something bigger. But I'm here to tell you, nobody goes out there and tells only the jokes that get laughs.
No, that's true. All of us, I mean, the hit to miss ratio is what it is. In terms of creativity is hard. Even if you're producing a great piece of work, arguably in the weird Plinko thing of life, you oddly don't know where it's going to land, either in the center or way out on the side thing. But also, I suspect a large part of your question is the sense that the grass is greener. You're looking at a friend's career and sensing like, oh, I wish I had what they have. And I will just say with Brad and I bet if you went back over the 5 years of the last, what Brad's produced and what I've produced, both Brad and I have looked at the other one and said, I wish I could do what Brad's doing, or I wish I could do what Dave's doing with this, or, there's always that sense of the grass is always greener, but you're not seeing all the struggles that person that's producing one big, huge title that does well is going through. For example, you're feeling that this, like, I'm just hitting a bunch of singles, but they keep hitting home runs. How do I hit the home runs? Well, you might not see it, but they might have, in the same way that home run hitters have this all the time, a lot of strikeouts that you're not seeing. That they might be pitching a lot of stuff or do the first 20 pages of a bunch of different projects, and their editor or their publisher is like, yeah, this is not working, start again. So yes, they're only producing a book every 3 years and it's a massive hit, but maybe there's 5 to 6 other books behind there that you never got to see because they never made it to the market. I'm just saying that's a possibility that usually a duck looks very calm from the surface, but there's a lot of massive paddling under the water,
Yeah, and it comes down to, okay, this person's got a bigger advance, but what did the royalty checks look like? How did it sell after that, right? After that big advance? And did you actually do better or commensurate by doing 5 or 6 things that didn't have big advances, but they all added up? And at the end of the fiscal year, maybe you both were on par. Maybe you did better. Than that other person. Unless you can really sit down and there are viewers like Dave, I could probably do this with you, like really talk numbers. Here's what in fact, we've kind of done that once or twice too, where I'm saying, this is what I'm making. This is what is happening. There are very few friends you can trust enough to do that. But unless you can ask this person to open up their bank account and say, what's really happening at the end of the year, then you don't know shit. Well, all you know is what you think you know. And listen, take it from somebody who's thought he knew what he thought he knew for 55 years plus. A lot of times I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, and let's put it this way. I know for a fact, a couple of cartoonists who have won all the awards. They've gotten the Eisners, they've gotten the Rubens, they've gotten the Harveys, they've gotten this or that. All the critical acclaim you could want from the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Comics Journal or this or that. And yet, I know for a fact they made like $5,000 on that title. Like it didn't make them jack squat. So yes, they have all the Sturm and Drang of like, look at all the exciting things that are happening around it. And yet the smaller comic that you had never heard about critically is quietly chugging along, making a healthy little income. That's why I'm saying older me is genuinely saying to a lot of younger cartoonists, aspirationally, it might be a better idea to not say, I'm gonna win the whole carnival, and I'm gonna get a pony, and I'm gonna get a gold car. Maybe the better aspiration is to say, I want a realistic career, and isn't it wonderful if I'm even able to get that? I want just decades of making a realistic income, stocking away a little bit for retirement, paying what I need to pay every month. And how wonderful would that be? Because even that is sometimes miraculous in this fickle world of ours, that you're producing a comic that you love and you're making an income from it that's steady.
Absolutely. So, Dave, I'm thinking that this is a great time to throw an update in. And we've got a bunch of them, a lot of topics that are really bubbling out there. Here's one. We had an episode not too long ago that said, it's official. We hate Patreon's free membership tier, right? We talked about that a lot. And you've got an update for us about Patreon's free membership.
Yes. So Patreon, to their credit, as they often do, they heard complaints and seem to be course correcting. I want to start this by saying I still hate free membership. I think from a marketing standpoint and a whole bunch of reasons that it's still clunky as hell in terms of how you pitch Patreon. But to their credit, you remember that I complained that you couldn't target posts to free members without bugging paid members. And so there was no way to walk them up the ladder. They're now going to start giving us means to target our posts exclusively to free members. That's great. Yeah. I fully support that. That's 100% a great move. And then soon you'll be able to invite free members to access the existing or new chats. That I could care less about because, as Brad has said, chat seems to be, one more pathway that gets you nothing. Like, why would you start chats? They seem to be useless. They also plan to expand direct messaging ability to your free members. If you remember, I couldn't email my free members. How the hell am I supposed to walk them up the ladder if I couldn't post to them? I couldn't email them. Now we're going to be able to have direct messaging. That's great. And then finally, to help grow your business, supposedly, Patreon is going to start sending upsell emails to convert your free members to paid. That's great. As far as I understand it, that's more of an institutional email. Like, hey, we're Patreon. We notice you're backing Brad Geiger. Maybe you'd like to start paying to back Brad Geiger, rather than Brad saying, hey, maybe you'd like to pay, back me. All of those are great. I still wish I had the ability to turn off free membership. I feel like, and again, for you in your business, you might think like, Dave, I know what I'm doing. I can make free membership work for me in the way I handle Patreon. I still a little bit feel like you're fooling yourself, but I wish that I could turn it off. I wish I could, but at least this is progress.
Yeah, I agree. And we have been hearing from people on the Discord server saying that they disagree with us. They like free membership. They've been making free posts and been successful in getting some people to sign up to become paying members and stuff like that. That's all well and good. And listen, that one of the key concepts on this show is pragmatism. If it's working for you, then you do that thing. I agree with Dave. I'm not a fan. And I'll say this, because I know there's a good number of not safe for work creators that listen to the show. You got the message that free membership was changing? I didn't. You know what that tells me? Because they're separate. When you go into the settings, there's certain things in this free membership area that not safe for work creators cannot change. It's grayed out. We don't get the choice. I still don't understand why that is, if I'm being honest. Okay. But it's just something to keep in mind if you're one of my not safe for work creator friends. We still may have a little bit of figuring out to do. But I will say this, Dave. I did make a post Monday that was a free post. I had a little piece of art there that I would normally have made a subscription only post, and I used it as a way to not only say, here's something that I'd like to share with you that's somewhat exclusive, but here's a list of previews of everything that's coming up this week, and also a little ad for my special offer that culminates at the end of the month. I've seen a little bit of movement on that has happened since then. and I'm going to keep trying it because, listen, that's the other thing when it comes to being pragmatic. Dave and I can both tell you that we hate free membership, and we do, but we will not stop trying to make it work or trying to find out a way that we can make this work for us. In other words, saying that we hate it and throwing your hands up in the air and pouting is not an option. At some point, we've got to figure out, I'm glad that Patreon is changing a bunch of the stuff with it. Well, I'm thrilled about that. I hope it applies to me at some point too. But in the meantime, it's up to us to figure out how to use it.
Well, and speaking of being up to us to figure out how to use it, let's just do another update real quick about KDP, and this will just be a quick one. So for those of you that have a Kindle Unlimited account, this is sort of like the Netflix for books, right? By the way, I'm not recommending that you sign up for Kindle Unlimited, but if you happen to have one, you can now search Brad Geiger or Dave Kellett and read all of our books for free. They're all up there now. I just want to say, again, I do not yet recommend that you put your books on Kindle Unlimited. So far, the numbers have been very meager, very mild in terms of what I've gotten the first month's income with all the Sheldon and Drive books out. But my plan for 2025, I'm going to give it a full calendar year with the thought that the recommendation engines are going to take a while to kick in. You know, you need sort of algorithmic links of like, hey, if you liked this book, you might like Sheldon, or if you like that book, you might like Drive. That's going to take the algorithms a little while to start putting that together. My goal in 2024 is to see whether the income from Kindle Unlimited can replace my own ebook sales. If it can, great.
Yeah.
I'm also seeing whether having both Kindle Unlimited linked with my Amazon Advantage listed books, those are physical books sold through Amazon. My goal is in 2024 to see whether those sales algorithmically are nudged a little bit upwards as well. So, again, I don't recommend it. I will update you all at the end of the year as to how it went.
Fantastic.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
All right, Brad. Well, we have another update that's come in thanks to a wonderful listener, a cartoonist that you and I both know, who says, hey, guys, I'm in the process of listening to the Saturday episode titled Rethinking Outreach 2024, where you're talking about Substack's Nazi problem. I just read an article about this very topic last week, and I think it may help soothe your souls about the ethicality of being on the platform. And we'll have 2 links to those articles in the Patreon post. It turns out all the alternative newsletter platforms people are loudly announcing that they will be using, leaving Substack and using, have even more lax rules against Nazism and bigotry and hate speech. And on top of that, the total number of Nazi accounts that were found on Substack was only 5 or 6. None of them were monetized and collectively had fewer than 200 followers. Most of them also wound up being taken down by Substack anyway. Basically, a very big to-do was made about what ended up being very little. So yeah, there's no 100% pure platform out there, but I think you guys can sleep easier at night using Substack. So Brad, you and I were talking about this last week because, or not, maybe not last week, maybe a couple weeks ago, because it's just a dang bummer. Like, we wish that Facebook could have the moral clarity. We wish that Twitter could have the moral clarity. We wish that any of them could. Each one has their own unique, frankly, moral failings as corporations and platforms. And so where does this land us in light of this update on Substack in terms of our general attitude or recommendations on what we point people to?
Well, listen, for me, and I'm going to reiterate what I said during the last episode, it really does come down to pragmatism, right? In other words, pragmatically, if I leave Substack because of their quote unquote Nazi problem, then I really have to leave Twitter because the same thing's going on Twitter. So I've got to leave Facebook. I've got to leave Instagram. I've got to take a completely different look at what I'm doing, and I'm not prepared to do that, right? So what the bigger question here is, what did we learn from this, or what do we continue to learn? And that is this. We had a show quite a while ago that was called Avoiding the Patreon Panic. And that's because at that point in time, this thing was happening, and it had a pattern, a recognizable pattern. Something would happen, and then something would be like, Patreon's doing this thing, and it's horrible. And because Patreon is the number one monetization method for most independent creators, this caused a big splash. And people would go out, they'd run around like their asses were on fire, go to social media and say, Patreon is horrible, and here's why, and they're doing this, and I'm leaving, and this and that and the other. And then, of course, next week when everything blew over, they'd be out there saying, oh, and by the way, join us on Patreon, support my Patreon. They're actually not that bad. I hope you don't remember anything I said. And meanwhile, I'm over here going, would you shut the fuck up? I'm trying to do business over here. And it had this ongoing recognizable pattern. And what we recommended then is what we're going to recommend now and recommend going further. And that is, there's going to be things that come up. And just like this, Substack has a Nazi problem. And instead of sharing that information, which may not be completely valid information, it may not be telling the whole story. Was The Atlantic doing clickbait because they knew that they could put something out like Substack has a Nazi problem and get a whole lot of ad views? Maybe that was part of what was going on. But instead of falling for the bait every time, like we do over and over and over again, it recognized the pattern. And that pattern is this. Something happens. It's disturbing. Mm-hmm. Like nobody likes the idea of Nazis being on a platform. It's disturbing. It's upsetting. It's emotional. And then instead of running all around and screaming and yelling about it, what I want to suggest is take a step, take a beat, pump the brakes, and watch what happens next. Instead of going out and retweeting misinformation and getting involved and yelling and screaming, take a little second, because it always happens in the same pattern. Something happens that's bombastic. And then a few weeks later, you get some more information. Yeah. And that puts it in a completely different perspective. Right. And now you've got a more complete image to deal with. Now you can make a little bit better decision because you've got a completely rounded idea of what you're actually dealing with. And what my suggestion is, instead of falling for the bait every time, take a beat, take a little bit of a breather and wait, become pragmatic. Take a second and see what's going to happen in another couple weeks. Then make your decision. Instead of saying, well, Substack's all going to fall down because of Nazis. Take a second and wait for the pattern to happen, because it always happens, and then make a decision. A couple weeks down the road, after you've been observing for a little while, you're going to make better business decisions that way.
Yes, and that's not to say that you shouldn't feel a certain urgency. You should feel, by the way, not act on, but feel a certain urgency, feel a heightened sense of, I need to pay attention to this. All of that is valid, whether the concern, the Patreon panic is about Patreon changing to free subscribers like I have, or whether it's about, oh no, is Kickstarter allowing for NFTs or AI, or is Gumroad allowing for AI or NFTs, or whatever the panic of the past was. Brad and I always say, give it a couple of weeks before you make a rash decision, is all we're saying. Because the pragmatism usually wins the day, in the sense that normally these things course correct, or it turns out that the whatever the Patreon panic was, and maybe, Brad, maybe it's better we call it platform panic. Because
I like that even better.
It works on any platform, on any medium, in any app. whatever the platform panic of the day is, it either usually solves itself or it resolves that it maybe wasn't that big a problem anyway. Like, for example, is it a really big problem to Dave Kellett kickstarting a book if Kickstarter allows NFTs? Not really. Do I want it to be there? No. Do I need it to ruin my business to fight a battle that's not going to be won? No. So why not be pragmatic about it and just keep kickstarting my book on Kickstarter, since that has the 800-pound gorilla platform? What we're saying here is that obviously, we all wish that these companies could do the right thing. They're not going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So the best thing, frankly, the only thing we can do when trying to navigate these waters is pragmatically balance your reactions to things with a little bit of added time. Usually they will fix themselves. If they don't fix themselves, sometimes it turns out that it was never a big problem to begin with. And then the third thing is then give it a couple weeks, then take action. Then make decisions. Like I eventually took my stuff off Gumroad. I eventually have made certain actions here or there. It's not what we're saying things aren't unwarranted in terms of making a decision. It's just take a slower breath and make the pragmatic choice instead of the instantaneous choice.
Actually, absolutely. And recognize the 3P, the platform, panic, pattern. If you can...
Oh, God bless America. God, he's always got one in the hopper. He's always ready to go.
Yes, if you can recognize the 3P, the platform panic pattern, that this always, and by the way, honest to God, we've been doing this for over 20 years, you and I.
Yeah.
Has the pattern ever broken? No. Always there's some big bombastic thing, and then a few weeks later, it turns out, we didn't get the whole story, and now we understand it differently, right? It's the same pattern, and falling for it over and over and over again. I mean, listen, it's forgivable if today's your first day on the internet. I get it. Just learning how to click a button. But you know what? If you've been doing this for a few days, you got to start to see that there's a pattern to this, and it's not forgivable. That, again, like I said, in the example of that person that's out there saying Patreon is horrible, not only are you hurting yourself, you're hurting everybody else that's trying to use Patreon to do business out here when it turns out a couple weeks later, you didn't have the full story. So the 3Ps, Patreon, platform, pattern, panic, poop, pop, poop, just recognize it.
So I will be the first to champion Brad's 3Ps. But I will say that I've always been a big proponent of the Dave Kellett 5Ps, which is you want to have perspective on the performance of your platform panic patterns. All right. So remember the Dave Kellett 5Ps, keep a good perspective on the performance of your platform panic pattern. All right. That's you can take that one to the bank. If Brad's making FCS happen, I'm making the 5Ps happen.
That's right. And I think that's just perfect.
Oh, big bang boom.
I will say this, just as long as we're talking about Substack. Remember how we were talking a couple episodes ago, how a lot of the big changes that Patreon unveiled a few months ago were clearly in an effort to chase Substack, right? They did the free membership clearly. And by the way, why does it work on Patreon? Or why does it work on Substack and it doesn't work on Patreon? Two different communities, two different expectations of behavior. They're putting a square peg into a round hole with foreseeable results, right?
So that's your consideration in terms of you're okay with free members on Substack and not on Patreon because to you, it's a very different approach to the whole thing. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Okay. And mainly because Substack is so heavily geared towards blogging. Here's how you do it. In fact, I've been doing a lot of stuff that I traditionally do on webcomics.com. I've been doing on Substack called the Webcomics Handbook on Substack. Right. So I can do, hey, here's a tutorial on how to draw a comic book page. And I got 3 paragraphs that go through there. Beep, beep, beep. And then it comes down and says, just like it does on webcomics.com, if you want to read more, you have to become a subscriber. Right. And I do much the same way that I did webcomics.com. I have a mix of free posts and exclusive posts. So sometimes I post something you can read it top to bottom for free. Sometimes I post something, I give you a little bit. You want to read more, you've got to become a subscriber. for Substack that works, because how are you going to do that with a 6-panel comic strip that you're doing on Patreon? You're going to do 2 panels and then you got to read cross the paywall to get the panel 3. It's not going to work. And because Substack is so heavily oriented towards writing, it's something that that kind of free membership on that works. Now, does that mean that you can't post a comic on Substack? Absolutely not. I've got a second Substack for Evil Ink, and it's doing really good too. In fact, it's one of the reasons just as long as we're talking about that, I'm really optimistic about Substack, because I've seen really good response from my readers. I've seen not only people signing up at the free level, but I've seen them signing up at the free level and becoming paid members. And without a whole lot of, how I'm always harping on exclusives, other than webcomics.com, which is very exclusive oriented. I've also got people joining the Evil Ink where there are no exclusives because they don't allow NSFW. And I'm getting almost the equal kind of response from people who are clearly using it as a tip jar for Evil Ink. I've got, in fact, I'm going to say it right now. I've gotten better results on Substack than any new method I've tried or used in the last 3 years.
Really?
I don't
That's
think
a big swing.
I don't think anything that I've done, any new thing, I experiment with this, experiment with that. I don't think anything has given me the provable results that Substack has given me.
And so just to clarify, that's not saying that the floodgates are open, you suddenly have 10,000 backers.
No.
You're just saying the rate of growth or the month over month growth has been a consistent good performer so far with you, right?
Yeah. In fact, I got no problem sharing you the numbers. I think I started a month and a half ago. Right now, and it gives you and we'll talk about analytics next, but it gives you this little dashboard. Right now, my estimated annual income for Evil Ink is about $300 annual. And it's about the same for Webcomics Handbook.
Right.
I'm on track, Dave, to make about $300 a year. But I mean, now listen, I've only been doing it 6 weeks, though. That's the other thing is that's for 6 weeks. That's actually kind of optimistic.
Yeah.
But are the floodgates open? No.
Right.
But let's talk about this next thing. Patreon clearly chasing Substack in all of these things, free membership, taking 2 screens to make a 1 post. All these things are very much chasing Substack. Patreon, if you're listening, if you want to chase Substack and do something useful for us, take a look at how Substack does analytics. Because Dave, I'm going to tell you right now, Substack's analytics are next level amazing. I can tell where my traffic is coming from. I can tell whether those people are converting to paid members or free members or both. I can tell when a free member becomes a paid member. I can tell what post they were reading when they decided to become a paid member. All of the granular analytics that we would rip our hair out for on Patreon. Substack's got it. Substack told me, and I didn't know it. I didn't know it before. Substack told me I'm getting better results on Threads than I ever thought I was. Not because I couldn't find that information out on Threads, because Threads certainly wasn't telling me. Patreon wasn't telling me. Substack said, you know what? You're doing almost as well with a post on Thread as you are on Twitter. That is mind-blowing when you take a look at the difference between the amount of followers I've got on each. Substack has been eye-opening in terms of its analytics.
Well, I have to say that alone is a unique thing of being able to see what actually the physical post that converted someone to becoming a paying subscriber. Boy, I would give a lot for that on Patreon when it came to what page of Drive made you suddenly decide, because that could tell me a lot about what's working about the way not that I would change my storytelling, but it would just reinforce certain things that are working. You know what I mean? In the way that a good comedian listens to an audience and listens to what's getting the laugh, and they're not changing their stand-up, but they're leaning into certain things, And so a good artist riffs on what their audience reacts to. And if Brad's finding like, hey, if I'm doing XYZ and it's getting a bunch more patrons, you would probably riff to that, And so I would kill for that kind of stuff. I don't know why Patreon doesn't do that. Can you think of a reason aside from corporate laziness and not having the headcount why they've never done that? Because analytics would be so helpful in raising their bottom line, you know?
Oh, yes. I don't know. I honestly don't know. That's something that flummoxes us, especially since we've told them over and over and over that we want better analytics.
Yeah.
This is a message they've gotten from us creators. Dave, speaking of which, Dave, get ready for buckle up, Dave. Just get ready for this. Do you remember going to PatriCon in 2019?
Was it 2019? Yes, I do remember going. Yes, with you. Yes.
And we went there and we had an opportunity at different times to talk to Patreon executive level people. And because they were like, tell us what you want. They had a notebook out and everything. They were making notes. I remember saying, Dave, I told her that and she made a note. I was on cloud nine. You know what I told them? I said, what we need is the equivalent of a gift certificate. You need to be able to gift people a subscription to your Patreon for a month, for 2 months. Give it like a gift. Imagine Christmas. I'm going to give you the ability to follow 10 different Patreon creators with this gift card. I'm going to gift you a subscription to Dave Kellett on Drive. And I said, we need a gift card. 2019, I said this. Guess, just take a wild guess. Close your eyes, hum for a little while, get in contact with your inner prognosticator. Guess what Substack has?
Does it rhyme with sniffed certificate?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yes, you can set up. So now listen, not only that, but they took my idea and it was my idea. They might have been somebody was bugging the room. I don't know what was going on. They might have this place bugged. I don't know.
Friends, ignore the fact that magazines have had gift certificates or gift giving for 100 years. Ignore that. Brad came up with the idea. That's fine.
This is my idea.
Yeah.
And as soon as I come up with an acronym for it, I'll prove it. But listen to this. So you get somebody to become a paid subscriber, right? And then they get 2 gift certificates, 2 gift subscriptions for free that they can give to their friends. Now it's not Brad Geiger saying, hey, come join us on Substack where we're doing great stuff. It's their friend advocating on your behalf to their friends, giving a gift that gives them like a free month or whatever. And holy shit, is it ever a good idea that Patreon should have stolen from me in 2019?
Well, okay, I have a couple of questions about this because this is kind of fascinating. I agree with you that putting the power in the user's hands and letting them spread it to the people for whom they know that they would respond to Brad Geiger's work or Dave Kellett's work, right? Like, oh, you love sci-fi and you love comics. You'll love Dave Kellett's Drive. You should take this free gift certificate. Obviously, they're going to do a better job than me getting it out to the world. But my question to you is this like a subsidized thing on Substack's part where you're getting paid $5 for that free month, or they're just saying, look, Brad, just trust us. You're going to want to give them a free month. The conversion rate is bonkers good, that kind of a thing?
You know that free trial on Patreon you love so much?
Yes. Yeah, I guess this is just that. Yeah. Okay.
It's that. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, yes. I mean, listen, I am still unconvinced about going to Substack. In part because I also, in terms of pragmatism, having not started yet, I'm seeing where things net out with this moderation stuff, but I'm also seeing how my friends net out in terms of putting in the legwork. And this is, in part, what Brad and I propose a lot of us do, which is keep your head on a swivel to what other pros, peers, and friends are doing, in the sense that Brad's probably watching to see if my year-long experience with KDP Unlimited and Advantage on Amazon works out. And if it does, he might dip a toe. I'm watching what Brad's doing on Substack because we can't tackle everything, right? So you keep your head on a swivel to what people are doing. I'm also at any given time keeping a head on my swivel of what Rich Stevens is doing with t-shirts or what Scott Kurtz is doing in the promo of his graphic novel with the publisher, right? Like you're keeping a tab on what pros are doing because I'm aware that mine is not the only path to the mountain. And in fact, sometimes I might need to switch paths because Patreon stops working or Kickstarter stops working or conventions stop working. So it's a great way to basically test out multiple platforms, multiple systems without having to do the work yourself by keeping your head on a swivel. So I am actively watching Brad using Substack, even though I'm not doing it myself.
No, I agree. March 22nd.
March 22nd, what? Is that the date I'm going to join Substack?
I'm going to have you on Substack by March 22nd.
All right. I'm going to see if that happens. Brad Geiger, I'll bet you a shiny Werther's Original candy that we'll see where I net up.
Hey folks, Brad here with a quick update about the next segment. Shortly after we recorded this episode, Nightshade was made available to the public. So if you'd like to find out more, go to nightshade.cs.uchicago.edu. And of course, I will have that link in the show notes. We're going to be talking about it next as if it's not available, and indeed it is. And I wanted to make sure you had that updated information.
So Brad, we've got one last thing coming in, a question coming in over at patreon.com/ComicLab. Speaking of AI earlier, this question comes in and says, hey, Brad and Dave, what do you think of the app Nightshade that, quote, poisons anything a AI bot would scrape off your work? So what this does is it basically adds a little bit of computerized nonsense into your image such that when it tries to scrape it, Nightshade does. There's a few other versions of this. It comes out all scrambled and gobbledygook, right? So that the AI can't build its library on your work, or when it does, it's all scrambled and gobbledygook. Brad, in general, what are your thoughts on apps like this? I don't want to limit it to Nightshade, but in general, things that sour a poison pill, basically.
In general, I think it's a great idea. I like the idea. I've heard a lot of people talking about it, and and every time I go out to find out more about it for myself, I don't see how I can sign up, how I can use it, how I can implement it. It sounds like it's an awful lot of, we've got a good idea, and stay tuned, watch this space and to see what happens next and so forth like that. So for me, this question is a little bit like, hey, Brad, what do you think of fairies? Well, I think fairies are very cool if they exist. I think that it would be wonderful if fairies existed. Yeah. I would love to meet a fairy. I think this would be great. Have I met a fairy? Can I talk to a fairy? Is there a fairy around the corner? No. But conceptually, I think fairies would be great. I feel the exact same way about Nightshade. I think it's a great idea. On the day that I can reach out and implement it and see what's actually happening, I'll feel a lot better. But right now, I think fairies would be cool.
Yeah, if I catch your meaning, I'm of similar mindset in the sense that, do I think this is great? Yes. Do I think it gives power to the artists who want to use it? Yes. Am I going to do it myself with my 5,000 Sheldons? Absolutely not. That's way too much work. I'm not doing that. I don't have the time or the wherewithal. And for a couple of reasons. One, I've already been scraped a couple of times. I've looked on the list. I've already been scraped a couple different ways by a couple different AIs. And secondly, I'm the rare artist that is still not 100% convinced that it's not fair use that I'm being scraped. I know that's going to make people angry. You can't tell me that there's not a potential that this is a fair use of my art. In the terms of, is it different than how other humans traditionally would have used my art in fair use? Absolutely. Does it require court to look at it? Absolutely. I'm all for that. I'm still not 100% convinced that artists are right, that this isn't fair use of our art. Do I hate the fact that somebody could conceivably make an iterative look that kind of feels like a Dave Kellett Sheldon or Dave Kellett Drive? No. I obviously don't like that, is what I'm saying. But am I afraid that someone's going to take over what the next page of Drive is? No, I still think I'm fine. I do think, and I've said this for a long time, illustrators are in trouble. And I think local illustrators that did small time business for small time companies are 100% in trouble. But in the same way that illustrators in newspapers, when the photography came around, were wiped out within the course of like 3 years, absolutely wiped out. I think AI is going to wipe out an entire class, probably multiple classes of illustrators. But I think cartoonists are a little safer. For Brad, you had the statement that they can steal everything you've done in the past, but they can't steal what you're going to do tomorrow. And that's how I feel a lot about AI. I think that's, for me, the balancing act. But I absolutely recognize that what is my saving grace with my career is not going to help illustrator friends for whom their style can be somewhat lifted and applied in a way that is reminiscent of their look and yet is not them drawing it. But and again, I am not the final word on whether or not that's fair use, but I'm personally not that concerned about it, I guess. And I don't, maybe I'm too flippant about that, Brad. I'm willing to admit that maybe I'm too flippant about it.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I was surprised to hear what you said about fair use. I don't think you and I have ever discussed that.
Oh, I thought we had.
I am debating whether I agree with that or not. I'm going to take a couple minutes to think about that before we go further. But I will say this, and this I know we've talked about earlier. This very much is, for our generation of independent cartoonists, this is our print versus web.
Yes, it is.
Right?
It is.
It is existential in its breadth, in terms of what it means to people who do what you and I do.
Right.
And very much the same way that those syndicated cartoonists, and you summed up, if somebody says, well, what does Brad mean by print versus web? Watch Dave's documentary Stripped. That's exactly what we're talking about here. That was basically the print versus web
basically
war.
A black swan event that comes in that no one expected, that fundamentally changes the way an art could be made money from, could provide livings. We were that for print and the newspaper world. And AI might be that for a whole class of artists online.
But you remember how, from our perspective, we say, we were like, these syndicated cartoonists, they're reacting out of fear and anger, and they don't understand, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, I have to admit that all of those feelings now and all of those conversations are coming back and framed under this. They apply, except now we're not the young upstarts. We're the old people who are fearful and afraid, and perhaps with good reason, because listen, there's not a lot of people making a living doing syndicated comics right now. Certainly nobody whose comic was syndicated anywhere after maybe 2000. I'm not sure. And again, I may be wrong about that because I certainly don't follow it anymore. But syndicated newspaper comics is not a viable career option anymore.
No.
And so should we be more afraid than we are? I don't know. I don't know. This is one of the reasons that I really have a hard time summing up my thoughts on it, because I still haven't really finished thinking about it yet.
Well, I do find it ironic that all the artists that are like, this is not fair use of my art, every single one of those artists has like 19 tabs open to Pinterest where they're looking at other artists and being like, oh, that's a clever way to draw that. I'm going to try to incorporate that into my work. What I'm saying is an iterative use of art is fair use. And depending on the sliding scale of how iterative this is versus how copied this is, and that I am 100% willing to grant, is that some AI is 100% copying, and yet what I'm saying is it's not such a cut and dry question, because when you can apply a style perfectly, yet create 100% original work. And you know what I mean by that? Like you can have a style that's absolutely drawn or painted in the style of Hogarth from the 17th century, and yet it is not something Hogarth ever made. Is that a new work? And so it's a fair question for the courts,
Oh, yeah. So let me put that another way. Let's take our friend Sarah Anderson, who was on the show. Very, very recognizable style, very recognizable tone. I could easily see somebody using AI to generate something that looks like Sarah's scribbles.
And has happened. Yeah.
And in so doing, now she's out a payday because maybe that would have been something that are used for an advertisement. You know what I'm saying, so on and so forth. Or a textbook illustration. You yourself make a fair amount of money licensing yourself, your work for textbooks, so on and so forth. I could see Sarah having or somebody like, let's not just pick on Sarah, but I could see somebody like Sarah having a legitimate claim that, yes, they're stealing my work. This is not fair use.
Yeah, well, that's why they are stealing your future work, which is an interesting argument that really the courts haven't been placed with yet. If I could completely copy Brad's style, right? In the past, a certain moral weight would come on society into the artist that's stealing Brad's style and say, you can't do that. We're not hiring you. You've just ripped off Picasso, or you've ripped off Monet, or you've ripped off Brad Geiger. And so no one would hire them. That obviously that moral weight would not apply to AI. And so that's why people are more scared, because the small Ford dealership in Des Moines absolutely is willing to pay for Brad Geiger style. They could give less of a shit, you know? And so that's why I say illustrators are 100% in trouble. There's no question about that. A whole class of illustrators, I think, are going to get wiped out in the same way that photography wiped out a line art look from 1840 to 1880. You know what I mean? Just completely wiped it out. Whoop, gone. Yeah. And so, but I don't think cartoonists, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why I'm sort of like fingers in the ears, like it's all fine, la 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 la. There's nothing to be concerned of here. I haven't been presented with an argument about why I'm in trouble that an AI has scraped my 5,000 Sheldons or my couple hundred drives yet. You know, like I don't know how that hurts my business per se. I don't know. You tell me, Brad. How does that hurt my business?
I have no answer for that, right? For people like you and me, I'm not sure. Like I've got the same feeling that you just said, right? Everything that you just said, you know, rewind it, replay it. I agree. But I could see other people who could that are making very legitimate claims to damages out of this, and I understand that too.
Right. So it really comes down to whether you can copyright a style of work for a thing that has not been produced yet. And I don't know in copyright history whether I've seen a case like that. I've seen you can absolutely copyright an image. You can copyright a branded image. You can copyright an application of an image within other images, like you can't put Mickey Mouse on a painting. But I've never seen someone say, hey, you can't I've copyrighted Monet's style of painting, therefore no one can ever paint like Monet ever. You know what I mean? I've never seen that done, which is a version of what we're saying here in terms of the dangers of AI.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. One thing I do want to come back to, though, you said that there might be people trying to use AI to like steal my drawing style. Right. And they want the Brad Geiger style. And so they use AI to swipe that. And I got to say, I could actually see that happening. You might have somebody trying to steal Brad Geiger's drawing style. But I'll tell you what they can't do. They can't steal my ability and my stylistic intentions of doing a really good transition to close out a ComicLab podcast. They can't do this. They can't do this. They can't say that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my wise and kind friend, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And Dave Kellett, who knows wisdom when he sees it, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And I should just say, because I should put this caveat on here, I'm willing to admit that I might be wrong about the fair use of AI scraping my 5,000 Sheldon comics. and the courts will say in the next couple of years. The good news is, if I'm wrong, I've willfully ceded all future art in the sense that I've now wiped us out of all careers. So that's my idiot gambit here, is that I, by saying that it might be fair use, I'm kind of smiling into the apocalypse. So I say ComicLab is a theme song used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode, like this one. This one comes in from Invasion of the Zim, and it says, I always like discovering new cartoonists, and this show delivers on interviews. One thing I will ask, though, is a question for Dave. Is the podcast you recorded with the Comics Curmudgeon available to listen to anywhere? I originally found out about Sheldon through that show, and I have bought several books, so I'm interested in hearing that interview.
Wow. First of all, that's lovely that that's how you found it. It's kind of nice to hear the random ways people have found your work over the years. Secondly, no, I have zero idea where, how, or if that exists online. Brad, don't you find that sometimes podcasts fall into the ether in terms of falling to the bottom of the fish tank, never to be found again?
I was interested in hearing your answer to that, because was this something you did a while ago? I'm not familiar with this podcast.
First of all, I have no memory of this at all. Secondly, I'm so glad that I was delightful enough that it made you seek out my work, but don't. So do you ever have this happen where you see friends again and they remember a joke runner that you had last time that you have no memory of? They're like, remember, you had the joke about the moose and you did it all weekend. Oh, the moose joke. And I'm like, I have no memory of that. I have no memory of this podcast. I'm so glad that it worked for you, but I am sorry, my friend, that I don't know where or how or what this appeared on, or where it would be found now. Unless you have good Googling skills, I have no way to guide you. But I will say, the current podcast that I'm on, ComicLab, is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So I will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/I have a Swiss cheese memory.
Dave, I think that I have to take a moment just to point out that the highlight of the show, the real highlight that I think is going to go down in comics history, is your 9 Ps of...
9? You upped it? All right.
9, yeah. I remember you very clearly. You said that there was prescient performance perspectives on platform panic patterns produces pessimistic platitudes.
You heard it here first on Comic Lab, gang. The 9 Ps of platform panic.
Do you have any idea how wet my microphone is now?
All I know is there's a lot of penguins that are purposefully walking through the room.
Well, that's their prerogative.
You son of a bitch.